Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look then at what is on the front pages. So let's see then what's making the headlines with the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha, and the chief executive of Conservative Home, Mark Wallace. Both are with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome to both of you. So, front pages then, we start with the Metro splash. Nobody told me, remarking on the Prime Minister's broadcaster's interview with Beth Rigby and his attempt to excuse his presence at a Downing Street garden party during the first lockdown of 2020. The Guardian describes the interview as disastrous and reports the mood on the Tory backbenches is hardening against their leader. Picturing a crestfallen Boris Johnson during that interview, the Telegraph reports that he will announce the scrapping of Plan B COVID measures on Wednesday. The Times also leads on the rebellion, with Conservative whips conceding a no-confidence vote may soon be triggered. The Express goes with the headline, "What a sorry state, new MPs plot to oust the Prime Minister." Meanwhile, the Star likens Boris Johnson to Pinocchio, describing the political situation as a pants-on-fire crisis. Scotland's Press and Journal reports on the upcoming removal of Omicron restrictions there. The FT leads on Microsoft's $75 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard, the gaming company which makes Call of Duty. And The Sun has an exclusive story, they say, on Strictly Come Dancing. Well, just a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you can see on your screen right now, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us and hear from our guests. So let's bring in Sonia Sodha and Mark Wallace. Good to see both of you in what we're being told is a really febrile atmosphere now in Westminster. Sonia, what are you hearing?
Well, those are a terrible set of front pages for the Prime Minister, aren't they? And I think the reason why things are moving so quickly in Westminster tonight is because of a disastrous interview that Boris Johnson gave this afternoon with Sky's very own Beth Rigby, where he was asked about all the allegations around parties. Dominic Cummings, his former senior advisor, said in a blog today that Boris Johnson had been warned about this party that on the 20th of May, where he went out and gave a speech to. He'd told Parliament, plausibly, that he didn't realise, he thought it was a work gathering, and he went out, gave a speech for 25 minutes and went back in. But in this interview with Beth Rigby, the line very much was, well, no one told me that this party or this gathering was breaking the rules, which has been met with some incredulity, I think, in Westminster. And it really did have the mark, I think, of an interview of a Prime Minister who's sort of coming to the end of the road. And I think it was that interview that has been sort of quite widely mocked that has really triggered things moving quite quickly. And there is talk this evening, there are some reports actually that Sir Graham Brady, who is the chairman of the 1922 committee, he's the person who is in receipt of letters from backbench MPs, and it takes 54 letters from backbench MPs to trigger a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. There are some reports this evening that I've seen that he will be making a statement tomorrow. Now, not quite sure what that means. We don't know if we're at the 54 letters yet, but there's a lot of speculation that MPs are plotting, in the 2019 intake, and the number of letters may be approaching that critical number.
Well, let's jump ahead to the Times then, in fact. Redwall Tory MPs team up to topple Johnson. These are the very people who have been reminded by some senior Tories that the reason they've got a job in the Houses of Parliament is because of Boris Johnson. But what's the mood amongst that group then, Mark?
Well, it's particularly striking, I think, that there is so much frustration among the 2019 intake. There are a number of things to remember about them. Firstly, there are over 100 of them. Nigh on a third of the Parliamentary Conservative Party was newly elected in 2019. A higher proportion of that on the backbenches, because, of course, a lot of them, as newer MPs, aren't ministers. They're not on the payroll votes. They're perhaps more free to act in this in this way if they so wish. The final thing to remember about them is quite a lot of them won marginal seats. Some of them won by very small majorities. Quite a lot of them, of course, that earthquake of the 2019 election saw them elected as Conservative candidates for the first time ever in these in some of these constituencies. So they have all the more reason, fine, to be grateful to Boris Johnson for what he did in that victory, but also to be particularly watchful of their sometimes slender majorities, to be particularly attentive to constituents, a lot of whom took a chance for the first time in their lives to vote Conservative, and who are now, whatever was going to happen in this Parliament, we're going to be watching closely to see if that change of tack was paying off and something they wanted to make a lasting habit or not. So it's fine to say that actually, Boris Johnson played a crucial role in a lot of these MPs getting elected, but that doesn't necessarily outweigh the fact that what they're going to think about inevitably is also the next election rather than just the last one.
Absolutely. And the Times suggesting that this group of Tory MPs are very open about it. They're calling it the pork pie plot because one represents the constituency containing Melton Mowbray. And Boris Johnson was holding meetings with groups of the 2019 intake of MPs in Parliament, Sonia. Does that give us to understand that he would stay and fight should this threshold of letters be passed, do you think?
Oh, I think he probably would. Yeah, I think so. The procedure is 54 letters triggers a no confidence vote. I think Boris Johnson will fight that because there is a chance that even if the 54 letters are received, he could still win a no confidence vote. And it's you've got to remember that it's really hard actually to predict exactly what's going to happen because so much of this is happening. We're getting lots of briefing from MPs, but actually keeping count of who's in which camp is quite difficult, particularly because some MPs keep their cards very close to their chest in this situation. So he will, but I think they'll, Boris Johnson, he may be sort of going round and trying to talk to MPs in Parliament now, but one of his issues is he is not really seen to be a prime minister who works the tea rooms, who really keeps great relationships with backbenchers, and there's a lot of them, as Mark was just saying, and I think that's what's going to come back to bite him now. I think the other thing that's really important to realise about this 29 intake, which is a group of the parliamentary party who seems to be moving most quickly against the prime minister, is that if you look at polling in their seats, so these are the red wall seats, the across the North and the Midlands that the Conservatives won from Labour at the last election. At the election and just after the election, Boris Johnson was outperforming the Conservative Party and the Conservative Party brand in those seats. Now, if you look at the polling, it's switched round. So Boris Johnson's ratings have dropped off a cliff, but he's doing the worst in the red wall in those seats. So I think this is why, as Mark was saying, a lot of them are very, very worried looking forwards because Boris Johnson, it's true, helped them win their majority and win their seats back in 2019. But in terms of which MPs are most affected by the drop-off in his ratings, if you look at the polling, it really is concentrated in their areas.
Well, Mark, I know that you often do soundings or pollings, don't you, on your site. So my question to you is, what's the mood amongst Conservatives? Do they want him to go? And if so, is there a candidate they would coalesce around? Because as we've heard today, many Tory MPs won't jump unless they know who they're jumping towards.
Indeed. So there's a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, an awful lot of frustration, quite a lot of disappointment. We held a snap survey of our party members panel that we normally take a survey of those each month on kind of regular questions for approval ratings. We did a snap survey Friday through Saturday, which found for the first time that I think I might say 54% of those who responded thought the Prime Minister ought to go. Now, that is a striking finding. The Conservative Home members survey, I think, had Boris Johnson winning about 75% of the membership vote in the leadership election. They strongly supported Brexit. They gave him sky-high, over 90% approval ratings in December 2019, January 2020. So there is very deep frustration and concern. I think, when I've been taking soundings today, I've heard of some places where Tory associations are losing members over in annoyance about this issue. A lot of people who are very concerned about the potential impact on the local elections, even if they haven't made their mind up on the Prime Minister's future yet. And frankly, I've spoken to some MPs, I've been in contact with some MPs today who are very pro the Prime Minister by general bent, but who are now feeling genuinely conflicted. Doesn't mean they're necessarily there at this tipping point yet, but they're very conflicted because they feel, a lot of them, like they've given an awful lot of chances to find an answer, a clear answer to this, to turn the ship around, to move the news on, and the story seems to be in charge rather than the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I suppose the timing is critical. Do you leave Boris Johnson to take the heat of the energy price cap story in April, the May elections, and then depose him? All of these things are being thought through, I guess, aren't they? But quick word, Sonia, if you don't mind, we're running out of time on the Daily Telegraph, which is Plan B to be scrapped. Is this all part of red meat, or is it part of the process of wooing some of those Tory MPs who never wanted some of these restrictions in the first place? Cabinet meeting, we understand, on Wednesday to sign this off.
Well, I think this is a tricky thing about it for us, the voters, watching this play out, which is that we want restrictions to be scrapped when it's the right time to do it from the perspective of the science and the pandemic. And things are looking a lot better with the Omicron wave, it has to be said. But there is a feeling, I think, with this Prime Minister that he's willing to make announcements to his political benefit. And I think there's no doubt that they will be hoping in number 10 that an announcement about lifting the Plan B measures, and it's interesting that the papers are reporting different things. So The Guardian and The Times are reporting that most of the Plan B measures will go, but that there will still be compulsory mask wearing in shops and public transport for a bit longer, whereas The Telegraph is reporting that they're all going to go. So I think we've got to wait and see what happens with that. But I think that Downing Street will be. This will take a bit of the pressure off.
Yeah, apologies. We've got lots to pack in. Second half too, so stay there. We'll look at how the UK government is preparing for the possibility of Russia invading Ukraine. That is next. Watching the press preview. With us again, Sonia Sodha and Mark Wallace. Welcome back to both of you. More concern about Russia's intentions in Ukraine, an exercise in Belarus, the US Secretary of State flying in for more diplomacy, and the UK, we're being told in the Telegraph, Mark, is going into crisis mode. Tell us more.
Well, we've seen, I'm happy to say, in the last couple of days, the UK extending further military aid to help Ukraine to hopefully deter further Russian aggression and to defend itself if it does take place. What I'm struck by really is two things. Firstly, that we all talk about whether Russia invades Ukraine. The fact is, Russia has already invaded Ukraine. It happened 8 years ago. They're still occupying Ukrainian territory. And the question is whether they're going to extend that invasion of their neighbour. And secondly, that Russia's always out to try and engineer a win-win outcome where the West is left feeling grateful if they somehow manage to give up some of the things that Russia wants in return for Russia not sparking further land war in Europe. I think we need to be very, very careful to not end up falling into that trap.
Yeah, you make a very good point. In fact, our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, who's in the Donbass region right now, makes the point that they feel like they've been fighting Russia, Sonia, for the last 8 years.
Yeah, Mark's absolutely right about that. You know, there has been this occupation of Crimea. So I think this is just a really, really troubling situation on sort of, almost a border with Europe. And, there have been reports from the US this last week that the Russian forces may be planning what they call a false flag operation. That's where one part of Russian forces kind of go subterfuge and they attack their own forces, and then they use that that as an excuse to launch a military invasion. We've been seeing increasing numbers of cyber attacks, which most people are sort of chalking down to Russia. So it's a really, really troubling situation. And I think the problem is what can NATO and the West and countries like the US and the UK do? And I think they've just got to keep on kind of, making the case, actually. I mean, the hope, I think Russia's actions may end up backfiring. Russia wants to keep Ukraine out of NATO's orbit, Ukraine out of NATO altogether. But actually, by taking these actions, I think it's pushing public opinion even more in the direction of NATO.
Sonia Sodha, Mark Wallace, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.